Okay, in the Clinch with Greg Nelson and Team Academy, where we tackle and grapple everything martial arts. First and foremost, brought to you by the Academy. Look at the website, theacademymn.com. That's theacademymn.com. Also, Zebra Mats, which we've always been part of Zebra Mats, and everything we have in our academy for the most part is Zebra Mats, from the floor to the walls to the heavy bag racks to the heavy bags to the cage panels. Best mat company out there, right? And also all of our instructors, right? First and foremost, it comes from Guru Dan Inasanto, right, who is in town this weekend, so it's awesome. He's going to be at Rick Fay's Minnesota Collie Group, and then Achan Chai with the WTBA, World Thai Boxing Association, and that's thaiboxing.com. And then we have CSW with Eric Paulson. That's ericpaulson.com. And then our Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructor, Professor Pedro Sauer, and that's pedrosauer.com.
Okay, awesome. Today we are going to discuss high-level coaching. Greg has had a lot of results in the mixed martial arts realm with developing people to the highest level. 3 different champions in the UFC and a number of different Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athletes who have been super, super successful. And Greg himself was a high school gymnast and wrestler, and I believe was an All-American in both, and ended up with a scholarship at the University of Minnesota for both, and ended up wrestling. And so I think he has a pretty unique perspective on the scene here for high-level coaching and what it takes to be really successful as a coach in martial arts, or really any type of athletics. So let's get right into it. We want to talk about what's a high-level coach, and go ahead, speak on it.
I think as far as coaching goes, no matter what, you got to have an absolute love for what you're doing, passion, all right? You got to want to do it more than anything else. And you want to also see your athletes succeed. I can tell you this, I had a lot of medals and did a lot of stuff, but man, when Sean Shirk won that belt for the first time, that was one of the most awesome experiences I've ever had, to have him be like a UFC champion, such a big thing. And almost all the times where we brought athletes to compete at the high level and they did great, it was just like, man, it's so awesome. To me, you got to love it, and you got to love the people that you're doing.
Absolutely. There's a vicarious, just thrill, overwhelming thrill to see your partner, training partners, and everybody win like that at the highest level.
So a high-level coach is basically defined by their results. They create high-level performers in their given discipline. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and try to break this down a little bit further. What would you say is the role of communication as a coach, between the coach and athletes, and even the parents and even the public?
Well, obviously you got to be able to talk to all the people that you're dealing with, and I always look at, from a wrestler standpoint, how did Dan Gable produce so many national champions and All-Americans? And he had that ability to talk to each individual in a way that allowed them to become the best they could. You're looking at, for 20 years straight, being able to produce great wrestlers who now are going off and coaching some of the most successful schools themselves. So, he had the ability to be that father figure. He also had the ability to be really aggressive with people. In fact, he wrote home to parents of the wrestlers, and asked if he could slap their kid. Right? So, they needed to be whacked sometimes. And that's pretty cool, because he saw that, and he knew that it would absolutely not work with other people.
So, you got nothing to add, Nat?
Well,
on communication?
Yeah, I think you have to be able to really communicate on a certain level. If people don't think that you really care very much, I don't think they're going to work very hard for you. And I think if they know that you are really paying attention and really care about how they're doing, they're gonna do everything they can for you. And I was just thinking too, all the competitions that I had done, Muay Thai and MMA stuff, Coach Nelson never yelled at me. It was always super calm. So he had a calming effect on me and made me feel really strong. So there was never any aggressive sort of coaching going on there. But I've seen him be more aggressive with other people, which was really interesting to me because it's obviously not what I needed at the time.
Right. So do either of you guys study any public speaking or interpersonal communication? Like, would you recommend that to people who are trying to become better coaches?
I think it's important. Yeah, for sure, because, there's so much more data now as far as what motivates people, what inspires them, how do you make them, push harder than they want to push, draw more out than they think is in them. And that's really, have to study about that. You have to go to the experts and, how do they speak to people? How does this coach do it? How does that coach? I remember reading a lot of John Wooden, and he was a basketball coach. I had nothing to do with basketball in my life, but how did he produce so many great basketball players for so long and do it in a really mellow, what can seem to be a really mellow way? He was always like this grandfather figure, right? But everybody talks about him with such awe.
Yeah.
And he got to the point where he would teach people how to tie their shoes correctly over and over until they did it right.
And how they dress too.
Yes.
They had to look and feel a certain way based on how they dressed.
Yeah, so he was really big into that, and so I started getting big into that.
Why do you think that he did stuff like that?
Well, it comes down to the nitty-gritty, and the most important thing is discipline.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like he was a really more of a positive person too. And it comes down to, you're getting more results with positive feedback than with negative feedback. And I think we learned that a lot from cornering fights is rather than tell them, don't do this or don't do that, tell them what you want them to do.
Yeah.
Not what they're doing wrong, but something simple. It has to be simple. But it shouldn't be negative. It should be positive. Just tell them what you want them to do, not what you don't want them to do.
That brings up one of the other questions, or one of the other sort of theories, is that as a good coach or a high-level coach, what's the role of being positive and encouraging to your athletes versus, telling them what you don't want them to do or being negative, like you said? It seems more modern psychology and most modern coaches are a lot more positive and encouraging, and they try to get their athletes to think and feel more positive versus, I guess maybe in the past, old school coaching was a bit more, I know some of the stories I've heard from Greg, it's a lot more negative. Yeah. There's a lot more negative talk, and maybe even some of my own experiences. But do you have anything to add to that, Greg?
Yeah, it's definitely more scientific now because they have so much more data and what's working and how people are motivated and what inspires them. And if you got some coach that just berates you and just yells at you all the time, pretty soon you're going to kind of have this feeling like, man, this sucks. Can't do anything right.
Your own negative self-talk to deal with. Mm-hmm. All athletes do. Yeah. And then you have a coach who's going to be negative too, all the time. That's
terrible. There's a time and a place, but it's got to be, if it's all the time, it doesn't have any effect. It's just negative. Right? That's all it is. But every once in a while, there might be a time where you got to be like, listen, you are not blah, 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 and it wakes them up. There's one instance I will never forget. It was James in freaking Holland. He kept bobbing and weaving and getting kneed in the head. And he just had done boxing. James Cook. And I slapped him in the head, and I said, listen, you bob and weave one more time, I'm going to freaking throw in the towel. And he's like, whoa, dude. And he went out there and fought. But the funny thing is, Ben Hubble went out there too. And I thought, in my mind, man, this is going to be tough for Ben. And James is going to be able to do it. But guess what happened? Ben had the opposite thing happen almost. He kicked right away and hurt his shin. So he couldn't kick. And he started kneeing. And it was like, Ben, just keep kneeing. I get him in court. Just keep kneeing. You're doing great. Ben ends up winning. James ends up losing. Mm-hmm. And in my own mind, I had it switched before that, and I, you have to try to hide those negative thoughts too, like, oh man, this guy might get his butt kicked, but you got to go out and say, okay,
Yeah.
This is what you got to do.
You're putting your idea on what they're capable of, maybe.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
And then all of a sudden it was reversed. And I'd like, man, I cannot think like that anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you have to be open to what they can do.
So what's the role? Another important thing that I believe is that a good coach has to be really dependable. If I'm an athlete, I have to know that I can depend on my coach to show up on time, and end on time for that matter as well. What's the role of being, timely and dependable as far as coaching goes?
For me, I look at it just as an athlete. When we were in junior high, you're expected to be on time into the gym, and either the coach was already there doing something, or you knew exactly where he was, and then the captain was there, and you had to be there.
Yeah.
And if you weren't, well, you got punished. You did push-ups, or you had to do something. And if you were late a lot, they were just like, I guess you don't want to be on a team. You're done. Mm-hmm. And that's just the way it was. And so I always tell the guys, hey, you got to have at least the discipline of a freaking junior high wrestling team. And that's the same for as a coach, you're there because you want to see your guys excel, and you want to be there, and you want to make sure that regardless if one person's there or two people's there, you're going to show up.
Do you think being late used to be a bigger deal?
I don't know.
I feel like, even when I used to do karate when I was a kid, if you were late, it was like a really big deal.
Yeah.
I feel like today it's still an issue, and humans are not perfect, and failure to show up on time and failure to end on time are always going to be a struggle to get to. We're all trying to get where we're going. We all got the same amount of time, and if we use it wisely, because we start and end on time, we're going to get the best results. If we don't use it wisely, we can't get the best results.
The fact is that just 2 weeks ago, our MMA team instituted a new rule. And if you're late for class, doesn't matter if you're doing jiu-jitsu, if you come in late, you have 10 push-ups for every minute. Mm-hmm. Same happened to me, and I was 8.5 minutes late, and I had to do 85 push-ups, and my frickin' chest hurt for 2 days. I used the push-ups, but I did it, so I was late, so I did the push-ups. And then, right after me, came the next guy, I said, dude, I just did 85 push-ups, you got at least 100.
That's why you're doing push-ups the other day.
Yes, because I was late. And so, comes from the top down, right? So I'm like, okay, I got to get in there. And even today, I was going to be late because I had to go pay lunch money. So I called. I said, listen, I'm going to be 10 minutes late. And I was like, I got to tell those guys I'm going to be late because I'm going to be doing push-ups otherwise.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important. And all of a sudden, jiu-jitsu class is going on. I go, there they are. They're doing push-ups. They do the push-ups. And I think it's important.
Right, absolutely.
How is that gonna affect everything else?
Yeah, when they're looking at the fighters too, the students.
It's at least a mental reminder.
Yeah.
If it doesn't have a great effect, it's at least a mental reminder of the value of your time. So, what's the role of loyalty as far as a high-level coach? Right? Should you be loyal to your athletes and expect the same from them to you?
Yeah, I think loyalty, I'm looking at, like when you're an athlete, you wrestle for this high school, that's your team, right? You just don't go to another team and hang out. Right now, and with the martial arts, I have, as a coach, I have no problem with guys going around and learning as much as they can from as many people as they can. But your team's your team, so when you're coming back to train for your fight camp or for your team, or be there for your teammates, now you're going to bring that stuff back, because that's how I learned. I went around to seminars, and I went to different schools, and I competed, and I took classes, and I brought it back. But then now let's give it to the team. And I think it's important. And not only that, if you're going to learn and you just got done fighting, now you got another guy that's going to be fighting, you got to get back to help them.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, what's going to happen if you're not there? Pretty soon they're going to be like, well, I'm not going to help that dude.
So it becomes all about you.
Yeah, and and right now I tell you, it seems to be more of an issue. I just look back at the team when we had Dave and Sean and Nick Tom. We had all these people in that room, and they would always show up, and they'd be there every day. And it was very rare that they just didn't show up. They were there. They wanted to make sure the other guy was ready, and vice versa. And that, by far, was the most successful team because they all were there for each other. It was huge. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, the coach is the same thing. You got to be there, and you got to be loyal to them.
Right.
You fight for them if you need to.
Yeah, that group mentality, and that camaraderie, and that loyalty to the group creates really, really impressive things.
We're seeing it right now with our Thai boxing team.
Yeah.
So it's awesome. We got all those people consistently training. You got Ryan or John there every single time guiding them.
I see a lot of young guys in the MMA team too that
Yep.
are starting to really put a lot of energy into it too.
Yep, and so it's like a resurgence, and that comes from me as well, And you have certain people leave, and you can get discouraged, but you got to think, hey, there's other people here. You got to keep the ship sailing, right?
Yeah, I think loyalty really, really builds trust, and when we all share that trust, then it helps carry us to do the things we don't want to do. If I think back to my friend here, Nat, when he was training for fights and we had to meet at 6 a.m. to run, I did not want to show up, but because of that loyalty and that trust, I had to show up every time. And the stronger that gets, the more results I think we get out of the time that we have. So
you never missed.
No, we never missed back in the day.
No.
We were sick. We were here training.
Yeah, that was probably the problem.
We probably should have missed sometimes.
Yeah.
When we didn't, in hindsight, but we learned as we got older. So what's the next thing is this idea of like knowledge. I strongly believe that high level coaches are like a dictionary when it comes to martial arts, and they seek out new knowledge all the time, and they're super humble, and they're a little bit skeptical, but they're constantly researching and developing techniques and training methods and stuff like that. What do you guys think about that?
I think it comes back down to that love and a passion for the martial arts, and for me personally, I just love studying martial arts and seeing new training methods and developing new ways to coach people. And I'm watching Thai boxing, and I'll watch Savat, and I'll watch something else, and I watch the CSW training. I'll watch whatever. I'm just constantly trying to do it. And for me, I'm always writing stuff. I'm always in my notebook. I have a notebook for Thai boxing, a notebook for jiu-jitsu, a notebook for wrestling. So I put down drills in there, write down all my classes, what I'm going to do. I think it's really important to study and keep up to date. I'm watching what other coaches are doing. I don't watch the fights. I want to see how they train for the fights.
Yeah,
So,
watch the training.
yes, and to me, I think that's so fun to do. And then, okay, let's bring it into the class and see how people do. And this person, I think this one's going to work for this person. They really need to figure out how to be more diverse with their kicks. I'm going to teach Savat. I'm going to force that on them. Make them do it. And I think it's important.
Well, I think also too, as all of us are getting older, we're enjoying the fruits of what martial arts does for people too. We get to see people reach these incredible heights that they didn't even think they could do. So I'm enjoying that more than anything these days. Seeing that.
You even watch, and see some of the greatest football coaches. Vince Lombardi is probably the number one coach people talk about. He was not the greatest superstar football player, but he created a dynasty.
Yeah.
Look at boxing. Look at Sugar Ray Leonard and Muhammad Ali with Angelo Dundee.
Mm-hmm.
Where's Angelo Dundee's championship belts?
Yeah.
They're not. But look what he created.
Yeah, performance-wise, those people weren't known as high-level performers, but their understanding, their study of the game was way advanced. So that leads me to another topic, which is how much is mental, how much is physical when it comes to athletes. How much time should athletes spend physically preparing, drilling and doing strength and conditioning and stuff like that, and then how much time is spent visualizing, sort of meditating, and then also reading and studying and film study of games or fights, and film study of themselves in practice or in competition and all that stuff. And could you also break down like time. How much time can I spend physically training? How much can I spend more time mentally training, or can I spend more time physically training if I want to get good, if I want to be great?
I think, it starts as a base is that physical push, right? You're training every single day. You have this desire to get up and push yourself, and physiologically, you're only able to push yourself full out to the max a certain amount of time, and then after that, it's either going to get really bad or it's going to get really dangerous, right? So you can push yourself super hard, for maybe, look at like Thai boxing. They have like 2-3 hour sessions, but part of it's running, long runs, and then you have your shadow boxing and jumping rope, and then one of them might be more pad work and or heavy bag, and then all of a sudden there's some clinching, and then in the afternoon it's going to switch a little bit. But there's a certain point, if you're pushing super hard, like you couldn't do like 15 rounds of full out Thai pads every day. Pretty soon your body will just fall apart. Heavy bag is a little different because why? You can change the pace. You can push, you can kick hard, you can move around, you can get inside and clinch. But I think the base of it that makes you mentally tough is that in everyday grind. And that makes you mentally tough, and that starts to bring in that mental aspect a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And that underlying passion is there. If that wasn't there, people aren't going to want to grind so hard like that. I just don't think. So there is a love there to begin with that the person really wants to develop. But I do think, if you're not confident in yourself and you can't picture yourself in whatever endeavor, if you can't see yourself winning or doing well, it's just not going to work for you. I don't care how hard you train. Once you get in there, it's not going to work that well. And so that really has to be decided, I think, before you even get in there.
I talked to the team, the MMA guys, the other day, and I said, because they're professional, right? And I said, what do most professional people do? They work how many hours a day? I go, 6 to 8 hours a day. And I said, okay, now can you physically grind for 6 to 8 hours a day? No, there's no way, right? But part of your training should be just drilling, which sometimes physically is not super demanding, but mentally it's really demanding if you're doing it correct. And so take some time and consistently have that time to drill or just work specific combinations on the heavy bag. Just you. You don't have to work at any crazy pace. You can just slow things down. There's a time where you may just simply look in the mirror and just shadow box really slow and just try to do everything absolutely perfect. That's not going to physically break you down, but it's part of that mental development, and that's where you can start to bring in your visualization, and you'll start to see someone kicking at you, and you're covering in your own mind's eye, and you're playing the game and getting some visualization back and forth. There's also going to be a time where you study, where you sit there and go, I want to, as an athlete, see how to become better. I'm going to study jiu-jitsu if I need jiu-jitsu. I'm going to watch some wrestling film. I'm going to watch wrestlers. I'm going to watch Thai boxers Thai box. Because when you watch something, you start to try to imitate and want to emulate those people so that you now have something in your brain how it should look when I'm doing something. So I think all of that plays a serious role in the development as a really professional and great fighter, or whatever you choose to be great in.
Mm-hmm. So I think obviously with the results that you guys have, you have a pretty good understanding of the human motivation. And when any of us think of a coach, we realize that a coach has got to be, one of the things that they're communicating is, and one of the things they're doing is sort of inspiring people. And I think back to when I first started, learning with Greg, I got super motivated by the things he said. And so can you speak to a little bit to about motivation and how to be a good motivator, and the difference? Motivation is usually thought of in terms of internal motivation and external motivation.
I think I was super blessed when I started out doing gymnastics and wrestling, the coaches that I had. And they were totally different coaches. I mean, the wrestling coaches were more discipline-oriented, right, and wanted you to work out hard and be there on time and do everything. I mean, they were just really disciplined. My gymnastics coaches were just literally, I still look back at them, and they were like crazy. They were like acrobats flying all over the place. And their whole goal was to make it super fun. And they wanted to see you create and be creative and try new things and not be afraid to try stuff. And that really got my brain thinking in a different way than someone saying, don't do that yet, you're not ready, you know, or someone trying to limit my desire to try something. They would be like, you want to try it? Let's get it going, let's try it, you know, and that created a different mindset for me. And so that coaching like that was super important, and it created an ability to love what I was doing. And like I said, I told people, I was thinking about this earlier, I don't remember, gymnastics-wise, when I was in junior high anyways, I don't remember one meet, one competition. But I can remember tons of things from practice because it was just so fun. And then when you just did your meet, he was just like, hey, go out there and do your stuff. And I don't remember if we won a lot or lost a lot. I don't even know. I can't even tell you. In high school I can, because now those coaches were very driven, but at that same time, they were all smart. Like Bill Strand, he was a BS in biology, or a BA in biology and chemistry and philosophy, and then he got his MBA. So super smart guys, and they were competitors. Dave Kuhn he got his BS in business and in business administration, and through painting and working and developing their own businesses, worked themselves through college. So they were trying to push that on us as well, how to be better people and how to motivate yourself. And it was huge having those coaches guiding us in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I was super lucky because as soon as I came over here, what was I exposed to? I was exposed to your mindset, gymnastics, wrestling, Muay Thai, and that just super hardcore mindset, super hard training. So that's what I was exposed to right away. So that was really that was the example. So I was like, well, that's how it's done. That's how you got to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So
when I think of goal setting, or when I think of motivation, one of the first things that comes to mind is goal setting. And obviously, you guys are in the forefront of your consciousness as your goals, as you've got all these great results. That's based upon this passion. Really, what you're saying is that you know exactly what your goals are, and you are willing to do whatever it takes to get there. Like, how do you communicate that to people, or what's the best way to get people to set goals?
I mean, there are very specific formulas that people use, and there's different styles. You have your short-term goals, your long-term goals, your medium goals. But for fighting, I just say, okay, what's the tip of the iceberg? Like if you're in MMA, it's to be the UFC champion. It's not just to get into the UFC. Believe me, there have been thousands of people in the UFC that no one ever knows about, ever heard of. One and done, in and out. But they can say, hey, I fought in the UFC. And then no one knows them, all right? Because their goal was to do what? Fight in the UFC, and they did it.
maybe they didn't have anything after that.
Exactly. Whereas I remember Sean, because I used to ask him about whether he'd want to test for his blue belt in jiu-jitsu. He goes, nope, all I care about is one belt, and it's gold.
Yeah.
And so he was the toughest four-stripe white belt in the world. All right? Because he didn't really have that. That wasn't his goal. He had his mindset on literally one thing, and that was to be a UFC champion.
Incredibly driven.
Incredibly driven. And that was, again, he became like a guide for people, but he was so driven by that goal that then that drove each day's goal. All right? And so that's what, if you have a goal up here, then you say, okay, today I'm going to do this. I'm going to get it done. No matter what comes in my way, I'm going to work my way through it. All right? And that's my goal. And so sometimes like for me, right now, I make daily goals.
You write them down.
I write them down. And I do that for 30 minutes in the morning after I get out of my sauna. Right? And so I write down what I have to do. Right? And then then below that, I'll write down what I want to do. And maybe I get to those, maybe I don't. But I have my what I need to get done this day. And my goal is how much time I'm going to, I try to write down how much time I'm going to spend on it, and then what I'm going to do next. So I try to strategically plan out my day. When I was training, it was a lot easier because it was just like, okay, from 3 to 5:30, we're going to push. We're going to do this, this, and this. And the mentality was just to go and drive hard and push. So
Yeah. But if you write it down, it becomes more real.
it becomes real.
Do Nat, you believe in the process of written goals?
Every time I write stuff down, it's way more likely that I'm going to get it done. If it's written down, I feel like that really, really drives it home. So.
Yeah, I always recommend for anyone who's an athlete who's trying to achieve goals that they are written down. So, and I think that helps to really build the confidence in the big picture of what you're doing, right? So let's talk a little bit now about the role of confidence, and maybe you can speak a little bit about the difference between confidence and arrogance, and what's the role of experience when it comes to being confident. Can you, if you're not experienced, can you fake it until you make it? Can you visualize yourself doing something enough times to get there? And should your inner voice in your head? I know that in my experience in competing, forcing myself to constantly say positive thoughts, fighting that fight. I know all of us that have competed fight that fight, and how can we get our athletes and competitors to take control of the reins of their voice in their head and get more confident?
Well, I mean, yeah, that comes down to it is calming that voice in your head, because, man, that's your biggest opponent right there. And the people who don't figure out how to deal with that, man, that's something that you have to deal with. And for me, coming up as a wrestler, gymnast, and all that, those are the two sports I took really serious. I did a whole bunch of sports before that, but when I became serious, now, you had to deal with the inner chatter a lot. And it was really different in the sports I did, in gymnastics and in wrestling. In gymnastics, you were getting beat by yourself because it was an inanimate object that you were swinging on. It wasn't somebody forcing you off or pushing you or doing anything. So you had to calm yourself down. I'd visualize my routines over and over in my head. This was happening right after I signaled the judge, which it felt like an eternity, but it was maybe 20 seconds that I'd calm my breathing, visualize myself going through my routine a couple times, take a deep breath, and then do what I did in my head. And I will tell you this, I sometimes visualized myself crashing because I crashed so many times, and it was like, what am I doing? And so that visualization was huge. In wrestling, now you got someone or fighting, you got someone who's now opposing what you want to do. They have their own goals, you have your goals. So now I had to bring myself up differently. I had to get a little bit more motivated. I had to kind of, sometimes I had to tone myself down because I was wanted to kill the person too much. So there was all this dialogue going back. And there's always in wrestling too, you'd weigh in and then you'd see the guy later and you're like, that guy's in my weight class? He's huge.
Yeah.
He's not. He's the same weight as you, but you're making this stuff up in your head.
Yeah.
And so you have to look at this person saying, I don't care if he's 400 pounds, I'm going to take him out. And so, because, there's a lot of that going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that day of, we've all felt that day of, that fight day, you're just, you can have a lot of negative self-talk and really a lot of anxiety. And I think that's what a lot of people feel, that, and they don't really want to fight after that.
Yeah, it's not the fight itself.
It's just that anxiety. It's their own mind. And I think that's a struggle dealing with that at first and figuring out how to deal with that, where to put all that negative energy. But if you do it enough, you realize that you get in there and then you perform, and then you realize it's just kind of part of what happens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I saw it a couple weeks ago, we had big Muay Thai fights, and fighter was just, he said, God, I hate this. I hate this part of it. I hate this part of the game. I was like, I know exactly what it's like. got in there. He knocked his guy out with a body shot in like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Tom Jenkins, that was amazing. So
Part of, I tell you, visualization, the first time I really experienced how powerful it is, I was a senior, and I was, Dan Craig was my gymnastics coach, and he was really a cerebral coach. You know, he said, you got to figure out how this works, and I'll give you some ideas, but and he wrote down specific things for me to think about, one for wrestling, one for gymnastics, how they combine. But I was crashing on his move, a release move on high bar. I just couldn't get it. And he said, get out the bar. All I want you to do this entire weekend is, and remember he said, as much as your adolescent brain will allow you to do, he said, I want you to focus on doing this move over and over. If you just all of a sudden sit down, you have nothing to do, visualize your body doing this move over and over correctly. And I was like, yeah, whatever, okay, I'll give it a whirl. And I did. I said, okay, man, if it's going to help me do this, I'm going to do it. So I tried. I would sit there before bed and visualize it, and I visualized myself crashing too. And then I put my face on another gymnast doing it because I knew what he looked like doing it, so I put my face on it. And Monday morning, or Monday afternoon, I got in there, and he goes, okay, blah, blah, blah. Okay, get up. Let's see the move. And I just about nailed it, and I let go of the bar. And he goes, why'd you let go? And I go, because I've never been there before. But I made it, and after that, I never missed that move.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, this stuff actually works. So then that led into, in wrestling, visualizing shooting through the legs, visualizing taking people down, visualizing not getting tired and winning scrambles. And
yeah,
man, it's huge. It
do you,
works.
Do you guys believe in teaching people when they're visualizing, say they're an athlete and they visualize the worst possible thing, like if I'm a fighter and I might get popped in the head and I might get 8 counted, and how am I going to react? Do you like to teach that to people?
Yeah, I try to tell them that.
I used to think of that all the time. Like if I get knocked down,
What are you going to do?
I'm gonna get back up.
I bring in the Michael Phelps.
Picture myself doing it.
He tried to, put everything into consideration, and he'd do stuff. He'd put his goggles on backwards. He'd take them off, one full of water, one not full of water, both of them full of water.
Yeah, anything plan for everything.
Anything that could have happened when he jumped off that block, he had already thought about it. And and the same thing in fighting. What if you're there and you break your right hand? What are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What are you going to do if you get rocked?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do if you get knocked? If you get taken down, you're on your back, and you got to figure this out.
You're stuck in a choke.
Yeah, and so that's why we do situation training. Mm-hmm. And we've done it. We did it in wrestling, and we did in gymnastics. We take that part of that routine that was really tough for us. We have to do it over and over and build that confidence. And then visualize yourself. And then in wrestling, we start doing situations. Guy has your leg. You got to get out. Mm-hmm. So then we do the same thing in fighting. What's going to happen? You're against the wall. You can't get away. You're against the ropes. Now you got to punch. So all worst case scenarios as well as great. Everybody wants to work what they're great at.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they don't want to work at what they're not great at.
They don't want to think about
no
when bad stuff happens. They want to picture the perfect time every time when they're visualizing. But
I would tell you probably one of the biggest things in recent time when Brock Lesnar fought Shane Carwin, because he's so serious. They figure out everything. That's the whole thing. What's going to happen if this happens to me? What am I going to do this? What happened to him? He goes out there. Shane Carwin takes him down and just starts Donkey Konging him. Mm-hmm. But everyone said, hey, man, they should have stopped that fight. He's getting hit. But if you watch it, he wasn't getting hit as much as you think. And the funny thing is that I talked to the ref of that fight, and he said Brock was under there the whole time going, don't you stop this fight. He's not even hitting me. And he was yelling at the ref, how are you going to stop when the guy's just talking to you?
Yeah.
And then what happened? Shane Carwin's arms blew out. He had nothing left. Brock was in between rounds smiling, looking at him. And he went down, freaking blasted through him, took him down, and choked him with a side choke.
Yeah.
Because we trained it.
Mm-hmm.
And and the funny thing about Brock is he wanted those people in there, in that room, that were going to push him. And that's why when we got Caprito submitted him and swept him, and he comes right in, he goes, we're keeping this guy.
When the first time you trained with him?
Because at first he was looking at him like, this dude's small. Just got smaller and smaller because we had really good jiu-jitsu guys, but they couldn't deal with it. And I remember I was grappling with you, and he comes in, he goes, Greg, he's making me do all these weird drills. I said, just get in there and do them. He's trying to figure out, he knows he can wrestle. wants to see if he can do any kind of jiu-jitsu. And then a little bit later he comes in, and he goes, is he going to do live rolling? I said, yeah, he's going to do it, don't worry. And it was like 20 minutes, 30 minutes later, he comes in just dripping with sweat, and he goes, we're keeping this guy. He's tying me up in knots. Mm-hmm. That was perfect. That's what he wanted.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
He sent people home. I remember he just told one guy, he goes, no, if you got in shape, maybe it'd work, but you're not in shape. You're going to have to go.
Right. So another couple more topics here before we close it out. How do you guys help people who lose? How do you help people after they go through like a huge struggle? How can you help them to continue to progress? Like, how do you change their mindset, reframe them, from failure to like a learning experience when they lose?
At the beginning of a person's fight career, I tell them, hey, this is the time to just get out there and let things go. All right, you're going to win, you're going to lose, you got to know what it's like to lose, and sometimes losing is the best thing. And I try to bring up examples, like think of Dan Gable. Undefeated in high school, undefeated in college, he had all this stuff, and they were going to present him with this big blanket, and he loses his last match. It's done. And to him, he said, if I didn't lose that match, I may have not have been an Olympic champion, because it changed the way I thought. And I let that guy get into my head. He talks about that. He was the first wrestler to ever get in my head. And after that, I had to learn how to deal with that. And so that defeat ended up making him a better wrestler. And so I bring stuff up like that. I bring up other stories of our own fighters who, after a loss, excelled and became better. And I said, it's part of the deal. If you're not fighting people that are potentially going to beat you, who are you fighting? You want those guys that are going to potentially beat you to fight. That's how you're going to be better. And then the other thing is, how many undefeated fighters are there that are at the highest level?
Yeah.
One, Mayweather.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's even when he can pick and choose.
Yeah. A lot of successful people have failed it many times.
And sometimes it can be a devastating loss. But I always tell people this. I said, if you go out there and someone just knocks you out, anybody can just duck their head and throw a punch and land it. That can happen. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's part of the deal. There might be a guy that you're fighting that is technically way better than you. It's just the way it is, right? But for me, if you're going to go out there, I don't want to see anybody lose because they got tired and broken down and fatigued. Mm-hmm. I said, that's 100% personal problem. That's something you can fix. You can't fix immediately somebody being technically better than you. You can't fix just taking a lucky shot.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, like everybody at the front of the line in their life was at the back of the line.
Yeah.
If it's victory without sacrifice doesn't mean really anything. So people that are winning a lot early on, they haven't really learned how to win until you know how to lose, right?
Yeah,
so
I think so.
Knowing how to lose is really, really an important lesson in life because, what Anderson Silva said, nothing, he probably wasn't the only person to say this, but nothing in the world is going to beat you down as hard as life will.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's super true.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember even talking to Marty Morgan, who's considered one of the best wrestlers and like a Yoda in wrestling as far as coaching. He never was a state champion.
Yeah.
He never even won a state tournament. I mean, he did well, but then his first year he became a true freshman Division II national champion, and then he became an undefeated Division I national champion who held the pin record for a long time for University of Minnesota, and he didn't mature yet. Cole Conrad is another great example for wrestlers. In high school, he was decent. He won a state title, but then Mako killed him like 15-0. Tech followed him in Fargo. Just absolutely destroyed him. When he got to college, he became a different wrestler. He grew from that. And then it was like he got fourth, second, first, was undefeated his last 76 matches, and Mako had 3 losses. Guess who they were? He switched it around on him, and all of a sudden Mako could not beat him. Mm-hmm. So and he lost the year before that. He had 3 losses, and they were all to Mako. Next year it flipped, and it was a mental change he did over the summer.
Clearly,
yeah. So last couple things here. We're in America. We've got a lot of people that are fat, let's be honest. How can you inspire people in this day and age to have healthy habits? So it's not just food, but also, rest and exercising at the same time, or sticking to your body to a routine. Because we all know if you're going to get the best results, you gotta eat right, sleep right, and train right. You gotta get the right amount of all those things. Like, how do you inspire your athletes to do that kind of stuff?
I think routine is super important. We always had it ever since we started. There was a time when we showed up and we trained and time got done and it was like clockwork. When people didn't show up, we were like, what's going on? I remember, this is even funny, when we had the morning ones in the old school, this is when James, he would be in his car because he knew that he partied a little bit too much and he didn't want to be late, so he'd drive to the gym and crash right there.
Yeah.
Because he didn't want to be late because the routine was
Didn't
like,
matter.
no, we got to be there.
Yeah, even if you stayed up late, you still had to be there.
And that was how I was, because I was working these really odd hours and when we first started, but it didn't matter. Get to the gym, and we opened up, and it was training time. And that was so important, setting that routine. And then, I look back at how I did things back in the day, and it was sometimes kind of insane. Wasn't sleeping a ton, drinking like 8 cans of Surge a day, just going and just push. And it was just like all driven on, it was like pure motivation and inspiration and just the desire to be great. And then as you get older, then you realize, man, you look at the high-level athletes and how disciplined and dedicated they are to every aspect of their life. Recovery is when you sleep, which after 52 years, figuring that out.
I think, the more positive things you do, the less negative things you're going to do as far as food and things like that. So if someone has a really poor diet, something as simple as just quit drinking soda.
Yeah.
That's the first goal. Just quit drinking.
Incremental change.
That's what I think. And then, then you lose 5 pounds.
Yeah.
And then what's the next thing? And the next thing, and the next thing. And then if they start training, now it becomes this balancing act between the training and then the bad habits. And the more bad habits you have, the harder the training is. And if a person is really enjoying that training, I feel like it starts to win out over those, really bad habits.
Right. Okay, so last topic. What do you say to people before a competition and even during a competition, in between rounds? I know a lot of people want to see inside behind the curtain a little bit. Like, how do you get people psyched up before fights? Do you ask them, do they practice relaxation techniques? Do you ask them to breathe? Do you have some, light movement, listening to music, stuff like that? What do you recommend for coaches that are going to be talking to athletes before and during fights and competition?
It's kind of like cutting weight. It's pretty individual. Some people want to listen to music. Some people, they want to make sure they're warmed up. They have to physically feel themselves move around and do it. And then that person, you got to kind of, hey, okay, you're good. You don't have to do any more. All the homework's done. And I think it's important for every athlete to have a pre-competition ritual. What they do, how they prepare, so their brain, their body, their mind are all ready for the thing coming up, right? Whatever it's going to be. And I used to have one, and I remember, even watching like Volkman when he used to go out to get ready for it. He'd be in the tunnel getting ready to go out for the UFC, and I swear he must have done this exact same thing when he was getting ready to wrestle, because all it was wrestling moves. He was doing like down blocking, and he was in a wrestling stance. He wasn't going to be in that stance, but mentally that shaped him because he'd been to the national tournament and All-American there 3 times. So going at that high level, he did the exact same thing that got him mentally prepared for that to go out and fight. And then when he fought, he just did his fighting stuff. So he had a routine. Sean had his routine. He'd listen to his music that he listened to, and he'd want to warm up. And since he was such a super high endurance athlete, he had to do a lot of warm up, because a lot of times his body, if you didn't warm up right, wouldn't be warmed up until like the 3rd round. So if it was a 3-round fight, he had to be warmed up and ready to go, really opened up. So some people would look at that and go, God, he's training too hard. Mm-hmm. No, he was just doing what he needed to do because he was so endurance-based athlete.
Yeah.
So it's really important that you find what works for you, and then the coach has to know that, because all of a sudden you have a routine that works and the coach says, no, you're going to do this. They'll throw you right off.
Yeah.
We've all been around somebody in the locker room who's, you're about to compete and they're nervous and tense and it's contagious, and you don't want to be around anybody like that. So I feel like I try to be really relaxed around fighters and show my confidence in their ability and how they're doing, and create that environment so they feel that and they know that you're confident.
Yeah.
I've been around guys who were coaching and they were nervous. I could tell they were nervous for me.
Yeah.
And it's like, ugh, that doesn't feel good.
It doesn't feel good. And the other thing is, like, in between rounds, for me, the first thing I say is breathe. Just breathe. Because if they're trying to figure out how to get their air back and you're telling them instructions, they're hearing nothing.
Yeah. Jamming the water bottle down their throat
Yeah.
before they've even got their air.
So the first thing, I sit them down, I just like, okay, take a big deep breath in, breathe, and until they just look at me and focus, okay, now he's focused. Now I'll say, like, for me, it's pretty simple things. Hey, this guy's doing X, Y, Z. I want you to move over here. Remember, we worked this. I want you to do whatever, cross hook, and then look for your shot. All right? And very simple, because you're too tired to have any kind of major dialogue coming at them. Like, man, I've watched coaches and I've heard coaches. Okay, hey, well, you got to jab, and then you got to step to your left, and then after that you got to right, and then fake a takedown, but don't take down. What is that guy hearing? Nothing. Charlie Brown's teacher. Wow, 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 wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My favorite 3 words to hear were impose your will.
Yeah, that's the one I use a lot.
You said that to me quite a bunch.
It's time to impose your will.
Right on. All right, well, we covered a lot of stuff today. I hope people liked it. Go ahead, take it away, Greg.
All right. Hey, glad that you all are coming on with us. We're trying to throw out our stuff that we've learned over the years. Next time, we're going to kind of take it from the other side, what it's like to be an athlete and train, the mental mindset of an athlete that's training. And we're gonna tackle that one, which I think is going to be super fun. I want to make sure that everybody goes to our websites. All right, I want you to make sure that you're all tuning in to, remember, info@theacademymn.com. All right, and that's academymn.com. Or look at us on Twitter, Facebook, at Greg Nelson MMA. And man, hope to see you guys, and keep up. Use information.
And if you like it, rate us and review us on iTunes and share it with your friends on social media like Facebook. All right, peace out.
Thanks, guys.
Important.